There's a lot that's said on Sunday morning at church. The pastors always plan a lot to say on Sunday, but they don't always get to it all. So here's part 2.
Part 2.
I'm Ryker Smith, and here we have Pastor Ben. He was preaching on Sunday. He was talking about Noah in Genesis, so we're going to go over that today.
Yeah, yes we are.
Something I really liked that you said on Sunday was that God doesn't call you to do average things. And I know that was definitely true with Noah. And building an ark, that's not something average.
No. And it's funny, like, God is like so high above the realm that we are operating in, and always outside our comfort zone. So anytime he calls you to do something, it's always above average, and it's always going to make you seem a little crazy to some people, for sure. Yeah.
And I know, you were called to something pretty big too when you left your job at Teck. What were some big butts there, and how did that work out?
I definitely had a financial butt, right? Because the pay grade that we're getting at Teck compared to at the church is a significant difference. So it was actually one of the bigger questions was, but God, will you sustain me, right? And then that was one of the big ones that we had, because it brought to expose, do I actually really trust in God to actually do what he says he is going to do in the Bible? And then also, just to sustain us. And so that was a big one. I was thinking about my kids at home. Like, am I going to be able to give them the future that I imagined for them in my mind? What about my retirement? Things like that, right? Like socking away money into retirement looks very different now. And so those are definitely some of the big butts that I had. I remember actually freaking out, kind of panicking. And I called James once, the pastor, and I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know if this is feasible, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny, he said, it's actually a good thing that you're freaking out, because that means you're taking it seriously. So I was like, well, all right. Then.
And it was crazy.
Yeah, but it's something that I wanted also to hit home on Sunday, was that when God calls you, he's always calling you to something that you are either ill-equipped or unprepared, or you feel inadequate for. Because if you were calling you to something that you can fully accomplish on your own, you lose the dependency that you have on him, and therefore he might not get the glory for it. You know what I mean? Because there's always people watching. There's always people watching when he's calling you to something and you go and live it out, right? And then so that they don't even have an excuse to say that, oh, he just did that because he's good at building arcs. Right?
God wants us to need him.
That's right. And then so when he calls us to something, there's often this period of, like, for example, I've been going to a new gym, and then when I got there, I kind of gave the owner, like, this is what I want to do. And he's like, yeah, you have so much potential. We're going to get you so far. You're going to be squatting this and lifting and pulling this, and it's going to be great and awesome. And I was like, yeah, I want to be there. That's what I want for my life, And then that was like a couple months ago. And then so he's like, just this process of actually getting there has just been putting me through the ringer. And I've gone home and I laid on my lawn, because I didn't have the strength to make it up my front steps. It's easier to get to the backyard. So I laid in the backyard and just in the cool of the grass, and then just until I didn't feel nauseous or dizzy anymore, right? And there's like, I sometimes I'll go and I'll just like turn the hose on and just cold water all over me, just to like. So the journey of actually getting to the vision that he has for me, and this kind of like call of lifting weights that he put on my life, of like what I'll be able to do, was exciting, but the process to get there is super difficult. And it's challenging me, and it's the same thing with God. He calls you to these crazy things that, like Noah is, calling him to He's going to live in a new land. He's going to have all the
Yeah.
animals, and every generation's going to flow through him after this,
Mm-hmm.
is maybe something he thought would be cool, right?
Yeah.
It's like, just like Adam and Abraham and everything, he's part of that great lineage now, right? Like the line of Jesus, God himself is actually going to come through Noah, like in the descendants and stuff.
Yeah.
And so, which is like a huge blessing. Like that was
Yeah.
literally
Oh, yeah.
one of the blessings that was given to guys like Abraham too. You'll be the father. And so maybe there's a piece of him that thought like, oh, this might be cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the process to get there was tedious and probably just tore him to his core, and and yeah. So God doesn't call us to average things. God did not call Noah to average things, and I think it's going to be that way all the time, right? Because in the end, it's all pointed back to Him, right?
Yeah, and God wants us to be separated from wickedness too, right?
Yeah. And that's actually interesting. That's what I like in that verse. I have it in here somewhere. 1 Peter. Hold on. These are all right here. 1 Peter 3, 20 to 21. Read it on Sunday, but the part that I found really interesting was that 8 persons were brought safely through water. It was through the water that actually saved Noah.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's crazy, because like the ark was just something that he built so that he wouldn't die, but the water is what saved him and I wondered why, and I was reading and searching about it, and I found that the water was actually what separated him from the wickedness and from the absence of God that was in on the earth at that time. And what First Peter does here is he actually relates it to baptism and what that's supposed to look like in our life, right? Yeah. And he says that not just the physical act of baptism. He says, like it says here, so that the removal of dirt from your body, like making you physically clean,
right?
But the heart of baptism, where you appeal for a good conscience through Jesus Christ, because Jesus comes and he renews you and makes you a new creature, and then it's like those waters of baptism symbolically come at that time in your life and cleanse you and separate you from the wickedness and the absence of God that you were living in before. And I thought that was super interesting, and it's the same with the call of God.
Yeah.
Whenever He calls you from something, it's not necessarily. I mean, that first call that you get is to Himself, right? Like, come and accept my salvation. Come and engage into a relationship with God and with me, and and that's always the first call, and that is that initial baptism separation thing that happens there. But when He calls you, there's always a point of actually growing closer to Him again, right? So when God calls you to something and you don't obey, you actually are negating yourself of the opportunity to be in a closer relationship with God Himself. I can say confidently now that I'm closer to God in this stage of life than I was at like when I was at Teck. Not that I was doing anything like necessarily bad at Teck, but because I listened to the call of God, I know Him in a greater way, right? Yeah. And even so, just to the call of ministry at the church, God called us to youth ministry, and the period that I realized that was in one of the harder times in our life, you know? So often God calls you to something and it's going to be great and awesome, but like we were saying earlier, there's that little period of this is kind of sucks, you know? Yeah. Right? Like there's is this, and I think we get confused too. It's like, God, is this what you had for me? Right? This little period here when it's just a part of it. And what I mean by our time of life is that I remember sitting in James's truck at one point saying to James that I was, we were working at Teck. We had the we had the youth ministry. We're still doing youth ministry, and we're in the school program too to do this better. And and then we had the kids at home, and there's just so many things on our plate. And I remember sitting at kind of in view of Teck. I think it was at one of the Silver City days. James was there, yeah. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I said, I was like, I can't do youth ministry anymore. I can't do, something's got to give, right?
Yeah.
Like I gotta, something's got to come off my plate, and I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And then it was actually in that time period that God met with me and gave me, affirmed me in my calling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And said, gave me like a heart for the teens. It gave me whatever that I needed, right. Internally to keep on going on. And so now, being in the positions that we're at, Kristen and I both at the church where we get to do this as our job, is like the completion of that calling. It's like stepping off the ark and everything's new and good.
Yeah.
And but there was that period of struggle first. And through all the butts that we do with this next series, that theme will be there. God calls somebody, they struggle and bog out for a little while, and then they come to, what He had for them. And and it's ultimately, He always calls you to Himself still, right? But if He can use you in a greater way, if He can pull you out of your bubble, out of your comfort zone, it's going to draw you to depend on Him. It's going to keep your relationship growing with Him too. So that's always the underlying thing for God. It's for you to be closer to Him and for Him to receive all the glory, because we're going to die and pass, and then, but His glory, it lasts through other people's watching you and doing the same thing too. Yeah. So He doesn't call you to average things. That was the question, right?
Yeah. So what did you mean on Sunday when you said you need to hold things with an open hand?
Yeah. I kind of drew that idea from the passage. What was it? Here, hold on. Genesis 7, verse 13. On the very day that all the rain and everything starts happening, like the thick clouds are all over. Some accounts even say that lightning was striking the earth and there's forest fires. Yeah. Right? And on the same day that all of this havoc happens, verse 13, on that very day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with all his wives and all his wife, and all the wives of his 3 sons entered the ark. Now, I said there's one of two things happening. Either one, they were holding on to like everything that they knew in the life that they had until the very last second, right? Like, so they believed that what God said was going to happen was going to happen. We know that Noah believed it because he built an ark, but his whole family together they believed, but they're holding on to what they had, and then that put them in a dangerous place. And by dangerous, I mean there could have been pain caused to them, right? Like, who knows? Like, if the earth is opening up and water's coming up from the ground, and you're the only one with the boat, chances are that people are gonna come, running in, and maybe one of them could have like not made it or something. Yeah. I don't know, right? Yeah. Like it's just a dangerous situation. And then so what happens if you you get the call of God on your life and you are holding on, you're trying to go at it with everything that He's calling you to leave, right? Or everything He's calling you to move forward from, but you're holding on to that stuff real tightly. You're entering that same position of, you're probably into some unnecessary pain. You're going to hit some pain that's unnecessary, right? Whereas like he will, if you choose to continue listening to the call, because at any given point, Noah could have said, I'm not building this boat. I would rather die. Right? He could have done that. Yeah. But if you choose to go through with God's calling, holding all this stuff that you're supposed to be letting go of, which is for Noah was his home and everything that he knew, right? That God will pry your hand open, and there'll be some unnecessary pain in your life that wouldn't have been there had you gone on the ark on night 6. You held the world held on to things with an open hand, so that if God has to take something away, you're not like hurt by it. And usually what that means for us is what we identify with, you know?
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of things so God might call you to something. For example, for me, I'll use myself.
Yeah.
So I love going through the workout. I love being strong and competing. And I have these certain ideas in my mind of what I want to do. And with those ideas, I need certain equipment. I need all this stuff, right? But if God were to call me to some third world nation that doesn't have all that stuff, if he were to do that, I would listen. I would go to that nation. But if I have my identity in things that only a first world can provide, right, then I'm going to have a hard time over here that I wouldn't have had if I said, like, no, my identity is in Jesus. I love this. I love this gym. Yeah. I'm holding on to it, right?
Yeah.
But if God calls me over here and he takes that away, then I'm not ruined. I'm okay,
right.
you know? Yeah. And I'm going to be, over here still, but having an easier time.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I was saying. That's one of the two things that would happen on the very same day. Like maybe they were holding everything with a closed hand, and that added to the stress and of everything that they were about to embark on and endure. And the other thing is maybe his family didn't really fully believe him, because the Bible only says that God talked to Noah. It doesn't say, and maybe he did, but we just some assumptions you just can't make. So maybe, some of the cases are that when God gives you a vision and you try to share it with people, some of the closest people in your life will probably be the ones that think you're crazy, because they know you the best. And they know what you're capable of and what you're not capable of. Yeah. And then when you say, God told me to do this, they know, like, you can't do that. Like, that's not within your... But he's like, but I'm going to depend on God. So that's where the craziness comes in. And so it's possible that Noah told his family... And his family, despite seeing animals come miraculously going on the ark, they might have not fully believed that this was going to happen, right?
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you can't blame them, right? And so maybe that was the reason why that they waited till that very day so everything got crazy, and then they're like, let's go on the boat, right? Yeah. And because it was, thank you, Noah, for having listened, right?
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes. That's another struggle that might happen too, is God calls you to something and you have vision and you got to do it, but those immediately around you don't see the same thing. And then so they might actually at some point be a resistance to you, right? But that doesn't mean that you like, like, fine, you know what, you're not allowed in the ark. See what happens. But that just means that sometimes you just have to be patient with people and stay true to what God has told you, because one day it will be revealed to them and they'll see, oh, I guess God did call you. I guess this was going to work out, So that's kind of what I meant by holding everything with an open hand. A little more that first part, not so much that second part, but I got that from the fact that they waited till the day everything happened to get on the ark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were holding on. So the flood was a pretty crazy event to have happened. I know there has to be some type of scientific evidence with this.
Yeah.
For this.
Yeah, there's a great documentary on Netflix. If you get the chance to watch it. Is Genesis History. It's on Netflix. At least it was when I watched it. If not, it's worth the purchase or the rental. Yeah. Is Genesis History, and this documentary is packed full of historical evidence that would point to a flood, right? Yeah. So, for example, one of those evidences is that paleontologists, they're called paleontologists. Those are the guys that they're all about the dinosaurs, and they do the bone digging and everything. Is they found it interesting that there's these certain hotspots of dinosaur fossils, right? And so today, the fossils that are kind of like being made today, as they were explaining on the documentary, is that of certain leaves and fishes and things like that, because the kind of order of events that has to happen in order to create a fossil can't really be reproduced on such a massive scale, right? Because to make a fossil, first of all, something has to be under intense pressure for a certain amount of time. I don't know exactly what that time is, but also it has to be not in the weather, right? It can't be well, what's the word? It can't be open to weathering, I guess. No, it can't be affected by weather, right? It has to be almost perfectly kind of preserved.
Yeah.
And so they find these geographical hotspots of, like, over here there'll just be a ton of different species of dinosaur fossils, and then you'll go to different places, just these hotspots, and they find it interesting that they're all together and not like evenly spread apart.
Yeah.
And they were saying that the reason that could cause fossilization on such a mass amount could be explained by some kind of great flood, that as the waters came up, they receded onto the high tops until eventually there was no more receding.
Right.
And then all of the things that are needed to make a fossil would only be present if there was some kind of great flood. And so that's just one of the many things that they talk about in that documentary. So there's another interesting thing about the flood. But first, before we get into that, we got to go back to Genesis chapter 1 in the creation account of the world. So Genesis 1 verse 6. And God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. I don't know if I read that right. But either way, water, expanse, water. Okay? Huh. And it was so. And God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning. This was on the second day. Right? And then so what that is when you've got an expanse between two sets of water, it's called a hyperbaric chamber. And then in a hyperbaric chamber, sunlight would actually affect living things in that chamber differently. So, for example, some people have successfully grown things like tomatoes and just fruits and veggies and stuff in hyperbaric chambers. And these tomatoes have grown to oversize and huge, and then so life just does better in one of these chambers. And so there was a point where the Earth was a hyperbaric chamber, which is believed to explain why people lived to 900 and something years before the flood, right? Like Noah lived to 900 and something. I can't remember exactly, but around 950, somewhere around there. And then Noah's dad was died young at 777 years old. Noah's grandpa said with Methuselah, 969 years old.
Yeah.
And then Adam also lived to some 900 years old. And then after the flood, life slowly starts to get shorter, right? So to roughly around what it is today, roughly, which is between 80 to 120, or which actually we don't really see 120 today. Yeah. But it got down to 120. Yeah. And then it's because of this hyperbaric chamber. And it's also interesting that the only bone on your body that will never stop growing is actually this right here, your eyebrow ridge, right? So imagine if you were to have that growing for 900 and whatever years, right? Yeah. That's where you would get these Neanderthal-looking dudes where they would just have like this natural ball cap to their face, And so they've used that to maybe explain certain things about like the size of certain dinosaurs and whatever, right? I don't really know that much about it to be confident in saying all of everything about dinosaurs and that, but the fact that there was a hyperbaric chamber is definitely a thing, and it would help explain what happened too, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Another question I know a few people had was, where did the floodwaters go?
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. That's super cool. I remember actually, I remember where I was going through like a Did You Know site. Yeah. And one of the questions was like, first of all, who did Cain marry? Which was always interesting. We're not going to get into that. But, and then where did the floodwaters go? Because the Bible accounts that all of the water in the entire earth covered everything. You know what I'm saying? And and we know that this was, pretty close to the creation of the earth. So it was 1,056 years Noah was born after the creation of Adam, and the flood came when Noah was 600 years old. So 1,656 years after the creation of the count. So the earth is still pretty young and pretty new. Floodwaters came and covered everything. And then where is it going to go? Like what room does it have to leave? And there's an answer in Psalm 104 here. There we go. Is it Psalm 104? I think it's Psalm 104. Yeah, right here. Psalm 104, verses 5. He set the earth on its foundations. Oh my goodness. He set the earth on its foundations. It can never be moved. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. So this is right here is referring back to talking about the flood. This actually, yeah. But at your rebuke, the waters fled. At the sound of your thunder, they took to flight. They flowed over the mountains. They went down into the valleys to the place you assigned for them. And you set a boundary they cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth. And so, the Bible here says that the waters receded into what we now know and call the seas, right?
Yeah.
So it says that, and also it says that when at the end of the flood, Noah sent doves out because the mountains were starting to kind of spring up, right? God says also that he I can't remember off my mind. I think he said that he blew on the water or whatever, something like that, and then the waters receded, and then mountains started coming up in the same fashion that the water covered the mountains, and that the waters receded into what we now call seas. There's another interesting thing in that is Genesis history documentary that I was talking about, where they're actually talking about the Grand Canyon, and they were saying that certain aspects about the Grand Canyon, and these aren't all Christian scientists either, but they're saying that certain aspects about the Grand Canyon can only be explained by a fast-moving rush of water. Because a lot of theory was that the Ice Age, right? That the Grand Canyon was carved by giant blocks of ice over the Ice Age. But they're saying that there's they can notice differences in the way the rock looks between fast-moving things and slow-moving things.
Right.
And so the water receded into what we now call seas, and left evidence of itself, such as things like the Grand Canyon, according to this documentary. And I thought it was super cool and interesting, but not an archaeologist. I'm not going to pretend I know what I'm talking about when it comes to like rocks and stuff. But I would encourage everybody to go and take a look at that documentary, because it actually covers a lot of what is talked about in the Bible, and more scientists through the account of the Bible are starting to point towards a younger Earth and things like that. That the text that's actually here is proven to be true on a scientific term and realm. And so I thought that's really cool. So that's where the waters went. If you want to know more about that, this is Genesis history.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Science.
I am not a scientist, but I know some things. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be it for this episode of part 2. Like this video if you like it. Be sure to subscribe for our next video and drop a comment down below to start a discussion.
Yep. And I think if you have any questions, also leave them in the comments. And I think we have a thing going for that, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
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 Yes, we do.
Sweet.
All right, guys.
See you next time.
Thanks for having me. Peace.